You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And today we are talking about sex after betrayal. And again, we want to just remind you that if you are fresh into betrayal and you've just recently been through discovery or disclosure, or you think that this episode might be triggering to you and where you're at your healing, then just make sure to, pass this one by. And then when you're feeling like maybe you can handle it better, then listen to it.
Mm-hmm. First question we received is, I could go the rest of my life without sex. Is this normal? We get this question. And I think we get it a lot. One, because we're a safe place to talk about sex. Mm-hmm. Two, because we are taking people at the very start of their journey of whether it's sexual addiction or betrayal. And so this is a really common question, a common feeling that women have to wrestle with. Like, I don't care about sex. I don't want to have sex anymore. And we would get it a lot at the conferences. Sometimes when we're fresh and coming out of betrayal, and other times they're 4 decades, 5 decades into their marriage, and they're like, we don't have sex. I don't care about that.
Right.
And my question is, like, well, does your spouse care? So we're talking about this in a way of, you're at the place in your marriage where it's like, I realize I don't like fishing, so I'm not going to fish anymore. Or I don't like sex, so I'm not going to do that anymore, even though my husband likes when I go fishing with him. And so we're at this place where we're just putting this on the table to talk about, like, how do we work with this issue if you're not somebody who has not processed betrayal or sexual abuse. So if you're somebody who's going through betrayal, or you've experienced betrayal and you have not processed it, or you've had sexual abuse in your past, we are not talking to you in this episode. We want you to know that that's always going to be first phase. We are talking to the person who they are madly in love with each other. They love spending time together, simply just don't want to have sex. And that's the person we're talking to. I would be tempted to challenge if we can figure out how to like sex more. I think Sheila Gregoire says it so perfectly when she describes, like, if you just take your wife out to dinner all the time and you eat this, like, I don't know, I'm going to totally butcher it, but like you eat this wonderful big steak and 4-course meal and she only ever makes it through the 2 chicken wings, why would she want to keep going out to dinner? Mm-hmm. It's never good for her, So kind of starting there, like, my first question would be, are you having orgasm with sex? Because if you're not having orgasm with sex, then there really isn't a draw. Like, it's a lot of work. You have to take your clothes off. You have to stay awake. You maybe take a bath. I don't know, but it's a lot of work to have sex. And so if you're not getting that reward of, that good feeling that God created for us, where we get pleasure from sex, then there's nothing drawing you to that, So my first question, are you having orgasm? And the second thing would be, talk to your spouse, because if your husband wants sex, or, your wife, if you're a man listening to this, if your spouse wants more sex and you could take it or leave it, that's kind of where I brought in that, in a joking way, that fishing analogy of, this is how my husband connects. And so we, many of us have heard of the 5 love languages, and some of us, our love language is touch, and some is quality time, and some is gifts. And so even if I may not be a gift giver, but I know my husband receives love through gifts, which that's not his, but then I may need to show love in a way that he likes receiving love. And so it's the same with sex, where we might just need to have those conversations and say, okay, well, what's your idea? What would be your ideal amount of sex to have each week? Or, how often would you like to have sex? And what's mine? And is there a place we can meet in the middle? Or are there challenges that are keeping me from wanting to do that? So in the younger years, when the kids were little, I never wanted to have sex because I'm so tired by the end of the day. And so we had to figure out ways where we can do that, like, when I'm not tired, when I'm not exhausted. So maybe it is more midday or planning it. And so I can just know, like, hey, we're going to have sex. I always enjoy it after we get there. It just seems tiring. It's like the gym, It's like, once you get there, you usually do it and you're glad you went, but it's really hard to get there sometimes. So just having these conversations.
That is a good analogy. Well, and with this question specifically, I always would like more information. And so it makes me wonder too, what season of life is this person in? Is it, because I know that sometimes just our body changes over time, and we would never encourage somebody to have, I mean, if sex is painful, it shouldn't be painful.
Right.
And so there's always those things that if you think that maybe there's something happening in your body that doesn't feel right, and that's the reason why you don't want to have sex, then definitely go to the doctor. I mean, because there are legitimate things that happen to our bodies that shouldn't be happening, or that there's a fix for. But if we don't take the time to even just schedule an appointment because something is wrong here, then that would be another area to explore. But it just really is, like you said, getting yourself to a place where it's about the relationship, that the sex should be more of a reflection of that relationship, and what am I going to do to make sure that we have a healthy sexual relationship.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the physical things, because I wasn't until, I think I was 35 when I had a hysterectomy, and I learned all these things that I should have learned when I was 12 about my body. And a whole new world opened up to me. And I'm thinking, why are women not hearing this? Like about pelvic floor therapy, and there's things like endometriosis or interstitial cystitis, and there's different things that can actually cause a lot of pain during sex. And so if you're having pain during sex, why would you want it? And it's really important to address those things, not only for your own physical health, but to give you a better quality of life too.
Yeah, I agree. The next question we received says, my husband is sexually anorexic. What does this say about me? Oh, this one is really hard because, and we hear this a lot from betrayed partners, because even though we can say over and over and over again that his, addictive behavior wasn't about you, that he had it a long time before he even knew you, that it just is, those are really hard to hear when you're in a committed relationship and you think that you are the only person that your husband is having sex with, and then you find out something different. It's really hard to not make it about us. And so then when you have a husband who, especially in the past, struggled with pornography or even had affairs, but now they are sexually anorexic with their spouse, that can be really, really tough for a spouse to not internalize that or to feel like there's something wrong with me.
Right.
We have learned that in some of our trainings that sometimes when you have a man who is struggling with sexually acting in, so they're sexually anorexic, they don't want to have sex with their spouse, a lot of times that could be an indication too that maybe they were sexually abused as a child and they haven't processed through that, because sometimes even when we start the recovery journey, it might reveal other things to us that we weren't prepared to see and we're not prepared to deal with. And so the only way that we can deal with them in the moment is to just like shut everything down. And so, but that can be still really hard for a wife.
Yeah, I had a girlfriend years back call me and say, what do I do? My husband doesn't want to have sex. And I said, I think you should start with like the easiest things to eliminate first. And so, is he looking at porn and masturbating? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, that might be your starting point. It's like, he's emptying the tank over here. Like there's nothing left for you. And so that would be my first starting point. And then if that's not the case, then maybe go to the doctor and have, hormone levels checked, because, life changes. So maybe testosterone levels are low, or maybe he has higher estrogen levels. Like there could be something physically going on. And then if those things are both clear, then yeah, probably explore counseling, because then it might be an intimacy disorder. And my John, he was so afraid of intimacy and close relationships growing up that when he left home, he hired a prostitute to lose his virginity to. And that started this years of being with prostitutes, because having to be in real relationship was too scary. There was a fear of rejection and all of that. And so if a husband is acting out and looking at porn or having affairs, or I've had women in my Unraveled groups that are like, I don't like sex, but they're there because they've had multiple affairs. And so there's something that's not safe, or that they don't want to pursue in intimacy with their husband, but they are getting their sexual needs or emotional needs met out here. And that's really can be challenging for the betrayed spouse who says, you don't want me, but yet you're doing these things out here. And it's very confusing.
Yeah. And again, like you said, getting professional help can really sometimes help a lot because these are hard conversations to have.
Right.
And especially if you, as the spouse, as the partner, is trying to find out information or even have a conversation with your husband about it, and you're not really getting any good information or helpful information, counseling might be a really good place to start.
And communication is so key. Last year, poor John, all your secrets are on air. Last year, early on, I know I've recognized year after year that my husband gets like the seasonal disorder,
Affect
whatever.
disorder.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets that and gets really low in the winter. And we've become proactive about that and really understand that. But this year, it was like he was not coming out of it and he had no sexual desire. And so I started having all of my betrayal trauma triggered, even though it's been years. I'm like, he must be looking at porn. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's interested in somebody at work. Like there's something going on because this is so abnormal for him. Even when we were going through our original healing and recovery, like sex was never absent. And so I was like, what is going on? And it was a day before he was heading to Florida. And I said, what is going on? Are you looking at porn again? Like, why do you have no sexual desire? And he's like, I don't know. And I am really glad you asked me because I didn't even really think about that until you asked me. He's like, but I've been wondering what's going on with myself too. My muscles feel weak. I just like am really foggy headed and disengaged. And so, I was like, well, you should go to the doctor and have some blood work done. He went to the doctor, never had the blood work done, even though it's literally across the street from his job. Total guy. But what I ended up doing was like going down a rabbit hole of research because that's what I do. So I went down a rabbit hole of research to solve all our problems. And I realized that drinking, even just a couple of beers not a week, could tweak the estrogen. And so now that John's 46 years old, I'm thinking, okay, he's getting older. Maybe he can't do things the same way in his 40s that he was able to do in his 20s and 30s. And I said, maybe we should try not having those beers, during the week, because from what I read, just a few beers a week can really elevate your estrogen levels and lower your testosterone. And he cut out alcohol and his sex drive came back. But it took months. And what happened in those months is I started to really have to work very hard that this was not about me. And that was really, really challenging to be in that place. Like, I'm not desirable. There's something I'm, feeling insecure. And so then even when his sex drive picked up because he eliminated alcohol and probably got more sunshine too, what happened was I had already now started feeling insecure, and like I had already like created a new pattern of like, oh, we don't have sex in this marriage, So then we had to have another conversation about what that looks like to re-engage again, know? And it was just, what it did for me is you don't live in this world where you're one way and it's that way forever because there's menopause, there's babies, there's hormonal changes. There's now I'm 45 and I can't have a few beers a week without it affecting me. There's just aging, there's injury, there's deployments that we really need to be prepared to navigate all those highs and lows and not let them derail us or spiral us into like a deeper situation. Our next question we have is another doozy. Does the Bible really tell us we can't withhold sex from our husband? Yes. In Ashley 24:16, Jesus says, no, just kidding. That is, okay, cut that out. That's like heresy. It's so hard because I never want to trample over anybody's faith. And so when I have my friends or women come to me and I can see clear toxicity or unhealth in their marriage coming from their husbands, and then they're saying, and he still wants to have sex and I just feel so used, I feel so dirty, I feel so abused. And I say, you don't have to. It's okay for you to take a therapeutic pause and for you guys to say, what do we need to be healthy before we re-engage in sex? And when people use the scriptures that are saying, submit to one another, your body is his and his body, what it's, in my perception, is what it's saying is culturally back then and still in some cultures, wives really were seen as like an object and men were elevated higher. And so I take those verses to mean that Jesus is making us equal. He's saying we're mutually, you had said it before, we need to mutually respect and we need to mutually give to each other out of love and joy, but that he's really saying she's not an object. Like
Right.
we are together in this and it needs to be mutual.
Well, and I think that too, when the scriptures that talk about that you're not to deprive your husband of sex, I think that really there are times where it's not as much about depriving your husband. It really is more about we have some unhealth in our marriage.
Right.
We have something that I'm feeling abused and I'm feeling used, and I don't like the way that our sexual relationship is making me feel. And so, according to scripture, we're going to take a pause on this. And it really does say so that we can pray and meditate and get help in this area.
Right.
And it's not forever, but it is a time where we need to rethink what our sexual relationship is going to look like, because I really don't like what's happening and it's not good for my mental health. And so we're going to pause for a while for a designated time, and we're going to get help with it, and then so that we can come back together in a healthy way and resume sex. I really think that needs to be what women get from that scripture, and not just that I can't tell my husband no, but to recognize that yes, you can tell your husband no, but make sure that you're doing it in the right way for the right reasons and getting the help you need.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this in our episode, Sex, Sex, and More Sex, where it's like that can be an indicator, a spotlight on that this is just an indicator that there's some other unhealth. So let's pause this physical intimacy while we figure out the emotional aspect of this. Like, what is wrong? Where are we detached here? Or where is there some unhealth so that we can address it? So taking a pause from sex so we're not doing more damage on damage.
Right.
To be able to, like you said, pray and meditate and hopefully use that time to come back together so that sex can be that overflow of emotional health.
Right. And that's another reason why when we engage in counseling that is based on or is with somebody who knows what sex addiction and betrayal trauma looks like, that can be really helpful in helping a couple figure out what's going wrong in their relationship and then help them to re-engage in a really healthy way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's scary to do when that's not what you've been taught, or you've trained yourself to think that sex is what keeps, the marriage healthy. But in the long run, it's going to be better. And I remember Diane Roberts, who's our co-founder of Pure Desire, when she said she came to a point of saying, I need to be honest about it. I think she said they were 5 years into their marriage. It's like, I need to be honest with Ted, because my choice is to keep doing what we're doing and live this kind of false reality when it comes to our sex life, or be honest and have a different outcome for the rest of her marriage. And she was so glad that she did that. And I think a lot of us find ourselves in that situation of like, okay, I either can let this be the way it's been, or I can say something which will be challenging and it may be a little disruptive to our sexual life. But in the long run, it's going to create health and hopefully, and safety.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for joining the conversation. If we can think about it, we should be talking about it. So please send us your questions to unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if this episode was helpful, make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend.